Okay, everybody. Today we have another distinguished guest, Roland Lazenby, the author of this 800-pound behemoth, The Life of Magic Earvin Johnson. How are you today, sir?
Kevin, I'm doing great. I hope you are.
I am doing well here in snowy, well, it's gotten better, Akron, Ohio. Where are you today?
I'm in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, outside of the city of Roanoke.
All right. If I ever go to Roanoke, what's a good place for me to eat or visit?
Gosh, I actually live in Salem. I lived in Roanoke for years. Where would I go? That's a tough one. Boy, you put me on the spot.
That's what I
I'll tell you, out near the airport, Shakers.
Shakers.
It's reasonably priced, but good food.
All right. Whenever I'm in that area, I will check it out. So as far as the book goes, there is an unsung person that we need to talk about before we get to Earvin Magic Johnson, and that is your wife. Because I read in the beginning of the book, she digitized over 300 cassette tapes of your interviews from the early 80s to the 2000s with the Lakers. Yes. How important was your wife to this book?
Well, I've written 70 plus books. Now, a lot of those are not like this. The biographies are big, long works. In the early years, I was writing a lot of texts for sports picture books and whatnot, and little smaller projects. And I would do 5 or 6 of them a year to make my living and feed my family, in addition to teaching a little college on the side. But every step of the way, I've been married 48 years. Mm-hmm. I way outkicked my coverage on this one. She is a lovely lady, and gosh, I people can't imagine how I ended up with such a magnificent woman. But like I said, I've been lucky my whole life. So she's had a role in, she's a technologist. So she's had a role in, I started writing back in the typewriter days. So I'm an old coot.
That's good. So for the book itself, one of the things, there's a lot of things I didn't know. And let's go with the early Magic. One of the things about early Magic that was interesting, because Magic is a proud alum of Michigan State. He supports the teams. I'm sure he's a booster. Like he goes back to Michigan from time to time, especially Lansing. But Michigan State was not his first choice of going to college. It was UCLA.
He didn't want to play for Judd Heathcote.
Yeah. So what was the problem with Heathcote?
Well, first of all, Gus Ganakis, the coach before him, had reached out to Magic as a young player, before even high school. Magic was a junior high phenom. Junior high players were up to 9th grade in Lansing in the mid-'70s. And Magic could go to any Michigan State game he wanted. There was no crowd, so it didn't matter. But they had a lot of racial troubles in Lansing in the 70s. And they had some on the basketball team. And that got Gus Ganakis removed from the job of head coach. He stayed at the school in an athletics capacity. But first, Earvin, he wasn't known as Magic at the time, was upset by that. But second of all, he had seen Judd Heathcote, who had coached at the University of Montana and had made a nice run in the NCAA tournament, almost upset John Wooden's last team, and coached an amazing player named Michael Ray Richardson. And so, but when Judd Heathcote arrived in Lansing, he'd never heard of Magic Johnson. I didn't know who he was, and he was advised that he better find out in a hurry. But Judd Heathcote was, some would call him a martinet. He kind of guy could stamp his foot and hit himself in the head when he thought his players were doing stupid things. And he, as one of his players told me, he would fight you. And he would take you in the back room and work you over psychologically. And Earvin wasn't real keen on playing for a guy like that. And as it would happen, they had a primary thing that would be a conflict for them. Judd Heathcote could not abide the idea of somebody passing off the dribble. Mm-hmm. And of course, Earvin Johnson, his genius was passing off the dribble. The no-look pass, the fast break, high-speed pass. And they were, it was like oil and water there for a while. But the thing that changed it all, Earvin wanted, he was serious about UCLA, but UCLA held off his visit. They wanted to look at another forward. And he had other places he was interested in. He thought he was going to go to Michigan. Michigan had just been to the Final Four, where it had lost to Indiana in that 1976 undefeated season. But the main thing in all of this that is important to remember, young Earvin Johnson had this incredible level of love and respect for his father, Earvin Sr. And Earvin Sr. was the kind of guy who would not tell Earvin Jr. what he wanted him to do. He wasn't going to push that in his son's way. Yet the son knew what the old man wanted him to do and was deliberating, going back and forth, seeing all kinds of different things, wasn't sure how to deal with this. He'd had a number of issues to deal with. But ultimately, Earvin Johnson, the younger, made his way by doing what he knew his father wanted him to do, but would not say. This great respect. And after a year at Michigan State, Earvin wanted to go. He had a big fat offer from the Kansas City Kings. Once again, Earvin Sr. wouldn't say, I don't want you to go. And Earvin Sr. was an auto worker, working lots of hours. He had a large family. He had a business on the side hauling trash. He worked hard. He was a spot welder, working in the grinding booth in the auto plant. And Earvin had so much respect again for his father that he stayed in school, turned down the instant wealth of going to the Kansas City Kings. The offshoot of all this, of course, is that Earvin Johnson, as a second-year player at Michigan State, had a date with this guy named Larry Bird in the NCAA championship. Together, their two teams produced the most watched, highest rated game in NCAA history. To this day, still the highest rated. And they went on from there, of course, to take their rivalry into the NBA at a time when the NBA ratings for TV games had dropped 25% in 1 year. The NBA had literally fallen off a cliff in 1979 when Magic Johnson and Larry Bird arrived as rookies. And so you couldn't have a more dramatic beginning to this chapter of basketball. And you couldn't have a more powerful and impressive thing in terms of the fact that it all hinged on a black teenager's relationship, or any color teenager's relationship, with his working class father.
Yeah, the relationship between father and sons, I think, is overrated too often. So, yeah, Big Irv was a very big influential person in Magic's life, especially being an influence. So, I was a Jordan guy. Love Michael Jordan because I was in high school and college when Jordan was playing. But then before that, when I was in elementary school, I was a Magic guy.
So was Michael Jordan, you know.
That was all that I was going to get to you. You can make an argument that Magic Johnson influenced three of the greatest players ever. Michael Jordan idolized Magic Johnson so much so that he called himself Magic Jordan. Kobe Bryant, when he was a little kid, watched tapes of Magic because his father was a big fan of Magic. And LeBron James, Frank Walker, I'm in Akron, so the Walker family, when they helped raise LeBron James.
I broke bread with Frankie Walker.
Oh, did you really? Okay.
Yeah, and he told me that, I was writing about Magic. I had a book I did in 1993 called The Lakers. And a coach in China had given it to his players. And he said, they all want to be like Michael. They all want to put their heads down and head to the basket. And I'm trying to teach them to be like Magic, to keep their heads up and see the floor. And that is how Frankie Walker wanted to instruct a young LeBron James. Keep your head up, see the floor, play with your teammates. And so your observation and your question there are so on the money, Kevin.
Thank you. I don't know if you watched the show Winning Time on HBO, because it's a dramatized version of the Lakers in Showtime. But one of the things that I liked about the program was the relationship between Magic and Cookie Johnson, or Cookie Kelly at that time. In a lot of ways, Cookie could have left Magic because they had broken engagements. They were off and on. Magic as much as he loved Cookie, he loved basketball more. He was out there being a bachelor. But I don't know if Earvin Johnson would be the man he is today if it wasn't for Cookie. It seemed like whenever he was down, she was always there for him. And I can't imagine everything that he's been through, he would be the same guy without her.
No, it wouldn't. And his first lawyer, George Andrews, out of Chicago, said, basically Magic was, and he was there for all of the busy times for Magic, and there were a lot of them. And he was there for the first 7 years of Magic's career, and he watched that. That was a transformation that began in Lansing. At Michigan State. He was a darling. He was an alpha male. It was an age when, the sexual revolution had already happened, and the youthful population of America was enjoying that. And Earvin Johnson was no different. Magic was no different, except that he was a very public figure in a Big Ten college town with lots of college age young people and females. And then he went to L.A., which was, much, much bigger and much, much more of the same. And he went to work for a man in Jerry Buss, who was trying to beat that same sort of path to all the young ladies. So, in that mid-'70s period, I happened to be a 24-year-old varsity head coach. And I had dealt with a lot of impressive young people. And as I was doing the interviews and research for this book, I spent a lot of time with Dr. Charles Tucker. Had a lot of interviews with George Fox, Magic's high school coach, with Pat Holland, the assistant coach on that team, and with teammates and other people. And I came to realize that a teenage Magic Johnson was one of the most impressive and powerful people as a teenager in America. He just wasn't known to everybody at the time. But to see this incredible young man from this very, very impressive family, it really also was about his corruption. And what that corruption ultimately cost him. Fortunately, that's not the whole story. This is, in some ways, a tragedy, but a small tragedy.
When you say corruption, what do you mean by corruption?
Well, you have to be careful. You can't declare somebody a sex addict, but he certainly was sexually obsessed to his own detriment. Now, he was in a position where he didn't have to go out and seek companionship. It came at him like a legion. And, the phrase back in the 70s was a good red-blooded American. And so in the context of that decade, it was something that began as relatively normal behavior, but it turned into something destructive and relatively abnormal, the degree to which it became his obsession. And so that's, it's happened to rock stars. It's happened to other Lakers, all kinds of pro athletes and all kinds of sports. It happens to everyday people if they happen to be in that situation. And so it led to a very shocking thing in American popular culture. But that whole part of the story is shocking in that regard. I have a feeling, though, I'm getting ahead of your questions, and I apologize.
No, you're good. You're good. No, you're fine. It's interesting because the book is 800 pages, so a lot of this stuff is all interwoven. So even though I might ask one question, it weaves into other parts of the book. So you're totally fine.
Right, it was an exhausting thing to do. You can look at me now and say, man, that guy looks awful. And I'm only 37 years old. So I'm joking. I'm 71.
Oh, okay.
But
still,
it was a major challenge because I had a lot of things I wanted to accomplish. Oh, I apologize. I can't believe that I didn't silence my phone.
It happens.
It does, and I've had a busy day, but it's inexcusable. I apologize for that.
You are forgiven.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. But it interrupted my thought. Do you recall what I was saying?
No, we were kind of going around, but you know what? I could jump into something else.
You had a good question, and I had a good answer.
The question was about Magic and Cookie, that how Magic probably wouldn't survive without Cookie.
I've been the benefit of one of those great loves, of that unconditional love of a woman. As I said, I've been married 48, 49 years. And Cookie Kelly is an extraordinary human being. And she she saved his life. She saved his soul. She preserved his goodness. And he had a lot of goodness. He had it innately. He had a tremendous emotional intelligence. He had the smile. He had the ability. He had the work ethic. He had the heart. And those things served to work against him at some point, as they do often in our culture for very talented people. You can have very talented people who have all kinds of powerful and impressive traits, and it puts them in an early grave. Mm-hmm. And I would say Cookie Kelly kept her husband from an early grave. I really sort of view it that way.
How so?
She came into his life right when he had finally really set himself up to be destroyed. She had persisted in marrying him if they weren't getting married, if he hadn't needed an insurance policy. He would never have gotten that HIV test. And she was there. She could have left him easily over all of that because he forestalled her and put her off time and again. He humiliated her. No one could have possibly blamed her for writing him off, but that's a great love story.
It is. Another relationship that Magic had is a friendship. On the back of your cover, you have a picture of Bird and Magic, and like you mentioned before, they basically saved the NBA. But another relationship that was interesting to me is a relationship with Isiah Thomas, and it's interesting just because they were like brothers. They were so close, and then it's almost like they had a big falling out. And like a couple years ago, they on the NBA channel, they had a meeting. They had a show, and they talked. And Isiah was talking, I was crying, and Magic was kind of crying. How would you best describe the friendship between Magic Johnson and Isiah Thomas?
Well, in the book, these are Gary Vitti, the Lakers trainer, told me years ago. These aren't the same kinds of friendships when you have guys that are superstars. They meet over a weekend and these relationships develop. And that's basically what happened with Isiah and Magic. But they made it a friendship too. They were both represented by Charles Tucker. There are a lot of things. But the competition came between them. And then when Magic Johnson was, it was announced that Magic Johnson was diagnosed as HIV positive, there was one or more players spreading rumors about him that he was gay. To the point, this became a big thing with Magic. He did not want people to think he was gay. And as Lon Rosen, his longtime friend and agent, explained, they did lots and lots of investigation to track down and pinpoint who that player was. But their relationship had already ended, really. It ended in the NBA Finals, the first time they met. And it started with Isiah being surprised at absolutely how physical Magic was with him. And there were all kinds of other factors. But, they were two guys that had the great smiles. They were sons of the Midwest. They were both point guards. They were both, well, as the lawyer for both men told me, Magic was a lover, not a fighter. I used to travel and work with the Pistons during the Bad Boys era. I can attest that Isiah was a fighter. He had to be. He was a tough little dude. And he was 6'1". That's not normal. Normally, you don't think of that as a little dude, but in NBA terms, and I had seen him sitting courtside many nights. I'd seen him. He would go down and get the ball among the trees. He was a fearless guy. And he had a lot of skill, and he had a lot of desire to make the terrible Detroit Pistons into champions. And so it was a lot of fun traveling with that Pistons team through that journey. I was there with them in the 89 finals when Magic and Byron Scott suffered hamstring injuries. The Lakers team melted away like the Wicked Witch of the West. And I was there the next year when the Bad Boys won in Portland. And I enjoyed those teams. Joe Dumars was my favorite. I liked the Worm a lot. He was an interesting kid then. He was really just starting to be who he became. But Joe Dumars was the real deal. Mm-hmm. And so I enjoyed those teams.
Right, absolutely. Let me ask you a question. What was a harder season? I know the hardest season for Magic is when he retired, when he was forced to retire. But what was the harder season for him? Was it playing under Paul Westphal, or was it losing to the Celtics in the finals?
Oh, I don't think there's any question. It's Westhead, by the way.
I'm sorry, Westhead. I'm sorry. I get that all the time. Paul Westhead. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Right. Well, everybody does because the first name too. I think Magic had controlled the agenda everywhere he'd been in basketball. I probably already mentioned that to you. You couldn't play your game, as Dale Beard, his best man, and his high school teammate told me. You had to play the way Magic wanted you to play, or you were going to sit on the bench. You weren't going to get on the court. And the coaches coaching him had to coach to his talent. And they would have been stupid not to. And they adjusted and did that. But he dictated the way they coached. You could argue that this very forceful young man, Magic Johnson, changed coaching itself. And he took on Judd Heathcote. People didn't realize that Magic as a freshman walked out of practice and was done with Michigan State. He and Judd got into it. But Charles Tucker was there at the practice, the Lansing school psychologist who had become Magic's advisor and would later become his advisor quasi-agent. And Charles Tucker called Magic's father. And Big Irv took care of it. The Magic went back. But that was not in the public eye. But he returned to the team. But Magic, down the stretch of that 1979 season, won the test of wills with his coach. And got the coach to get off the team's backs and they turned what was becoming a miserable season around and ended up winning the championship. When Magic got to LA, the Lakers were in a good bit of disarray. There were all kinds of things. But eventually the guy who was going to coach had a bad bike wreck. And Paul Westhead, this college coach, who had coached Jelly Bean Bryant at LaSalle. And Paul Westhead was a running coach. He he turned the ball over to Jelly Bean Bryant. Now, Jelly Bean didn't play point guard, but he at almost 6'10", and Jelly Bean, of course, is Kobe's dad. At almost 6'10", Paul Westhead said, "You get that ball, you go." He had a bouncy game. He did not have Magic's great drive and skill, but he had a lot of skill. And Paul Westhead was happy to let him play that way, recruited him out of high school with the idea that he was going to turn him loose. So it wasn't like Paul Westhead was determined to wreck the Magic experiment. Far from it. But Paul Westhead was put in charge of the team once the head coach had the bike wreck and was not able to return. And Paul Westhead, sort of was happy to let the system that the team had continue. Norm Nixon was an excellent young point guard. And here comes Magic, plays, what is he? He plays like a forward and a point guard. And so they just sort of set up a system where those guys could, whoever ended up with the ball could go. They were going to get out and run. And Westhead was happy with that. Westhead later coached a lot of the highest scoring teams in basketball history. But Westhead was not a real chummy guy. He wasn't trying to be friends with the players. But Magic was very excited, they won that championship. But the main thing was Magic had to take a step back when he got to the Lakers, because the Lakers had the greatest weapon in the history of basketball in Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And, any coach in America would ultimately say, our top guy's Jabbar. That's who every team schemed for, was Kareem. They didn't scheme for Magic. Magic's role as a rookie, he was helping the team by rebounding and running the fast break when it was there. But when they won the 80 championship, Kareem had dominated to give them a 3-2 lead. And they got that with half-court basketball. And so the Lakers were a schizophrenic team. They could run like hell, but they had this half-court weapon. And Magic was a good half-court player. Smart guy. He knew how to identify matchups. It was a very smart team. In fact, Jim Jones, and looking at the intelligence of that team, Kareem is viewed as this very, very bright man, a voracious reader, a student of this and that. But Jim Jones probably correctly pointed out that as smart as Kareem was, as intelligent as he was, Magic was a little more intelligent. And a different intelligence, more of an emotional intelligence, just understanding the whole human equation in ways that most humans don't. And Kareem was a guy with a classic intelligence, the kind they used to measure exclusively in school. We have a broader, greater understanding of intelligence today. It's not one style. There are a variety of ways, variety of factors in different types of intelligence. Anyway, the Magic got injured his second season. He had a knee injury. It was tough. And he missed a lot of time, and he came back at the end of the 81 season. His knee, he wasn't fully recovered. He didn't play well. the team suddenly went from having won without him to having to readjust late in the year to having Magic back. There was a lot of chirping in the news with reporters. And they lost to Houston in the first round, basically when Magic was supposed to get the ball to Kareem, but he took it down the lane himself and did a finger roll that airballed. And so he had immense frustration. And Westhead took the bull by the horns and planned to come in and really explain to the team how they were going to operate in the half court. And that's what playoff basketball was largely half court basketball. Now, Magic could change that equation with how he rebounded and ran with the ball. But there was a lot of half court basketball. That's how the Lakers had won in 1980. And Westhead was doing the right thing. Any coach in America would have done the same thing. But Westhead didn't have an understanding of the emotional component of pro players. And the guy who had become his assistant, a guy who had been in the broadcast booth for the team, was Pat Riley. And Pat Riley, had been a sub for most of his NBA career. He played behind Jerry West at the Lakers. West played all the time. They battled every day in practice. But Riley was always ready, and he was a stalwart. But the one thing he understood was the emotional component, not just of an NBA team, but of NBA players. Now, Magic got frustrated. He had all this power. He'd been given the 25-year, $25 million contract. He was running around L.A. with the owner. It was creating chemistry problems. Kareem was furious about it. A decade later, when I interviewed him about it, it was a tough thing. And it really threatened to deep six the team's chemistry, this relationship between Jerry, Buss, and Magic. But Magic took that power as a 20-year-old man to, he got into a tiff. They were on a 5-game winning streak. And he got into a silly disagreement with Westhead. And so Magic fired him. Mm-hmm. He was booed all over the NBA. But the real thing in it all was that he and Riley had that understanding emotionally, and they formed a great competitive partnership. One that, I've gone out of my way to explain, in fairness, that Paul Westhead was not what they tried to make him look like in that TV show. Might he have mentioned Shakespeare a couple of times? Yes, but he wasn't some idiot running around constantly quoting. But once Magic fired his own coach, that infuriated all of America. Plus, he's a black kid firing a white coach in that era, and so they had to make up a narrative where everybody immediately, the reporters, everybody came up with this narrative that Buss was going to fire him anyway, which was, as Jeannie Buss admitted, and it was obvious, Jerry Buss had no plan for firing a coach in November. That was all on Magic's emotion. And, that's well and good. It worked out really well. And Magic selected another coach, but Magic has remained angry over that for a long time. And, he's sort of done a couple of things to acknowledge to Westhead, but it's Magic's not a guy you want to get between him and his control of the basketball.
Right.
And that's all right. And now I was going to tell you that, yes, this is an 800-page book. As I'm talking to you, I realize when I let my phone ring that I interrupted what I was trying to do and what I did with this book. A lot of it involves integration around court-ordered busing early on. And Magic is thrust into the middle of that. And I wanted to go back and, you had immense misunderstanding. You had a lot of black families that had come north in the Great Migration. They'd come to jobs in places like Lansing and Detroit and Chicago. And they were a refugee population. They were coming there from a violent South that the violence still burned decades after the Civil War. And part of this story is how this figure, this revolutionary figure, with all this emotional intelligence, had to put that to work as a teenager in the anger of Lansing, Michigan, and how I wanted all the emotional shards from blacks and whites sort of being forced finally to come together.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a transformative figure in there who happened to be 15 years old. And I wanted to tell the story of how we as a people came together. And I wanted to preface that with an understanding of Magic's people, a deep understanding of who they were, where they came from, what they endured, things that a lot of people don't want to talk about today. But I think all of it's important. That's why I did it. I think all Americans need to have a deeper understanding of our racial history. It is the story of American freedom. I think that, we have a lot of factors in that. I really discovered something that a lot of people have known for a long time, but a lot of people have worked to obscure, and that is the concept of white fear. And it's long been a complicating factor in our culture. And so I just said, gosh, and I mean, these were white writers from the 1800s writing about white fear that I encountered. And obviously it's in the behavior. We got a large sample size of behavior in this country, a few hundred years. And so I just wanted to, the whole story is fascinating. The other thing is all the moral conflict that came out of the Magic family story. And it's also a great story about religion. And because the missionary Baptists, I was stunned that the missionary Baptists were anti-slavery in North Carolina in the 1830s. And this big, powerful slave-holding family where Magic Johnson's people were enslaved, one of them had a conversion while traveling to the family's plantations in Florida. He stopped in at a missionary Baptist church. He was blinded by the light of truth, and he converted. And he then had a missionary Baptist convention back in Tarboro when he got there. He was only in his 20s, but he had an anti-slavery convention in the heart of slavery country. And he was reviled. There were all these things going on. But, I think it was part of the story. It's part of who Magic Johnson's people were. And nothing happens in a vacuum. We are the chain of our people. And, Magic's not just some guy. He is it's like when I wrote my Michael Jordan book, Michael Jordan, The Life. It just came out in Portuguese this week. It's in 21 languages around the globe. Now, people don't give a hoot who I am. It's not, let's go buy this Roland Lazenby book. They don't care about that. They are fascinated by Michael Jordan. They're also fascinated by America's crazy race relations. And I like to write as frankly and honestly as I can about our racial history. One, we're in an age where people don't want that told. And so, that just almost goes without saying that if there are people working really hard to obscure that story, then it's the job of a writer to make it known. And so people have thrown some nasty things at me. That's all right. I don't care. I do know people can change. They have changed. There's not enough of them yet. But this story is a long, epic story. I did the same thing with Jerry West. When I wrote the Jerry West biography for ESPN, it came out in 2010. His family was at Jamestown. And his family was Lord De La Warr Thomas West. Delaware, named after this very powerful guy, but one of the line from Thomas West got kicked out of the family. That was Jerry's family. They had to go over to West Virginia and become dirt-scratching hillbillies. So there's always great drama in these backstories, but they're very important, I believe. And when you look at the scope of Magic's life, or Michael Jordan's, my Magic book just got optioned in Greek, the Greek language today. Magic's already in 7 languages. My Kobe Bryant book is in 12. I have to stress to you again, I'm not that guy. You can look at me and see that. What people are buying is the deeper understanding of not just these very powerful stories of Black American athletes, but powerful stories of Black American businessmen, because Kobe, Michael, and Magic were all three that. If Kobe had lived, who knows what kind of things he would have done. That was a different dude there. But I will tell you, look at LeBron James. Same thing. These are, and of course, it's not about basketball players. It is, because the game was the first doorway opened. But it's about Black Americans in all walks of life. Mm-hmm. And so the foundation is there for what I believe is a more wholesome view of who we all are. And it prevents a more wholesome view of things we can all be proud of. And it is not black versus white. It is black and white. And that is, if we just stop to think of that, that's our strength. That's not our weakness. It has been made our weakness. We've done that to ourselves, and then we've allowed people to do it to us. But the hope is that soon enough, it's not. I don't know how long that process takes. I know if we hide the truth, it's going to take longer. We'll never get there. And so the stories are there. Basketball people want to read basketball stories. I understand that. But you don't get the basketball without the history. And we don't have this opportunity as Americans without the history. And so it's a biography. It's supposed to be big, big in terms of the person, big in terms of the depth of understanding, big in terms of the cultural context around them. And let's have at it and hear the whole story as we go. It is 830 pages. It is 30 hours of audio book. And so, Michael Jordan's only 21 hours, but it's about 100 pages shorter, 700 and change. And Kobe's about 695. But if nobody's going to tell these stories, if nobody's going to talk about race, by God, I am.
Well, that's a good place to stop. The Life of Earvin Magic Johnson by Roland Lazenby. Please pick this book up. It is fantastic. It's a great read. Thank you, sir, for the conversation. You're a very interesting fellow, and thank you for appearing on my show.
Well, thank you, Kevin, as are you. It's a conversation between two interesting fellas. You have a great day.
You too, sir.